economic crisis, you had a situation where there was not a lot of funding to go around for public transportation. You had, as the economy was recovering, people were buying more and more, especially two-wheel vehicles, which was making it easier for them to get from one place to another. But the public transportation system was losing riders. And the existing parts of the system were not operating very efficiently. You would have buses stop in the middle of the road to pick people up, drop them off. There wasn't very good routing, and you had more and more people moving or shifting away from public transportation. And this was a very big, important policy issue, but it was also a very big political issue. So when Governor Sutioso was elected governor of Jakarta, 2004, one of the things that he campaigned on was bringing a new public transportation system to the city of Jakarta. And this new public transportation system was focusing on this idea of BRT, or bus rapid transit, which we discussed previously. Now, at that time, in 2004, when he brought this idea to Jakarta, there weren't a lot of BRT systems in Asia. And in fact, he ended up going to Colombia, Bogota, Colombia, to look at the system that was there in Latin America that was considered one of the more successful systems. And so he was so impressed by this idea that he decided this would be one of the ways to deal with Jakarta's transportation problems. And when he did this, what he decided to do was create the bus system. Initially, there was one line, and I think, if I'm not mistaken now, it's up to 15 lines or so?
No, it's
15 corridors.
it's a target.
Okay. When he decided to create the first line in 2004, he also thought it's important to create a new set of institutions to support this line. And so the agency that had been in charge of transportation, the Jakarta Transportation Agency, otherwise known as DISHub, would then have a parallel organization that would be responsible for the BRT. That parallel organization was called Transjakarta, same name as the BRT system. And similarly, he created a transportation council made up of representatives from civil society and from academia to provide technical advice and also to comment on some of the social issues. When Transjakarta was initially opened in 2004, after a little bit of few challenges initially, the first few months, and some protests, actually the system ended up doing quite well over the first few years. And you can see it a little bit here, but I mean, this is some of the early lines to get on to Corridor 1. You can see that the bus is moving quite well here. I should say that it wasn't only a bus project, there were other complementary policies put in place to support it. So there were restrictions on how many people could ride in vehicles that went on the same road as Transjakarta. But largely for the first few years, Transjakarta was considered quite a success, especially the first line. Now, what happened is, around 2007, moving into 2008, Governor Sutioso left office, and you had a new governor come in. And that governor was not as interested in Transjakarta, and also had his own view on how to solve some of Jakarta's transportation issues. So he decided to take Transjakarta and make it a subsidiary or subordinate below the Jakarta Transportation Agency. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, the Jakarta Transportation Agency was quite happy about this. But Transjakarta was not as happy, and one of the results of this is that many of the pieces of the technical enabling environment began to break down. So you began to have more problems with the road on which the BRT system drove on. The road began to crumble, and it wasn't fixed so quickly. You also began to have this problem right here. I know this is quite far away from most of you, but can anybody see what else is happening, what's happening in this very, very small diagram? Maybe tough to say. Yeah, almost impossible, yeah. Okay. Yeah, another high five for you. Okay, what's happening in that very small diagram? Yeah, and I was surprised you didn't come through with the Sydney thing again, but anyways. What's happening in that very small diagram is that the bus now is riding on its own separate lane, but many other cars are also riding on their own separate lane, okay? And the police that were supposed to enforce this were not enforcing it, okay? So many of these changes had a technical nature to them, but many of the problems themselves weren't solved so easily, in part because Jakarta did not have as much access to the governor's office anymore. This is another case of where sort of the institutional part, in this case, influences some of the technical parts of the project. And if you look at the number of people that are riding the BRT, which is going to be very important to co-benefits, the number of people riding the BRT on the subsequent lines started to go down for lines 4 through 7, or corridors 4 through 7. Okay. The good news is, last time I was in Jakarta was about 4 or 5 months ago, but the good news is the BRT system is doing better these days. It's out to 15 lines now, and as I understand it, there's also plans to build a metro now in Jakarta.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also LRT.
And LRT as well, yeah. So the BRT is only part of the solution, but I think things have improved. But now what I want you to do is think a little bit about your co-benefit project or action. And I want you to think a little bit about the institutions, the process, and the elements of enabling environment that are going to be needed to implement it successfully and implement it in a way that can actually achieve the co-benefits you're going to estimate. So that's where we're going to go next. And what I'd like to do now is we have approximately a 15-minute coffee break. Then we're going to break back up into our groups, and I'm going to ask you to start thinking about institutions and structure, institutions and process and enabling environment for some of you. And then some of you are going to also be estimating possible co-benefits from a BRT. And that will be, the 3 parts of your action plan will be, what are some of the benefits? What is some of the quantification? And what types of institutions and process do we need to actually achieve the quantified benefits? Okay. So let's have a break for 15 minutes, then I'll give you more instructions on that. 15